I'm Emily Thompson, a woman who built a multi-million-dollar tech company from scratch. Sounds like a dream, right? But let me tell you, it wasn't easy. It never is. You see, when you're working 18-hour days, building an empire, making every sacrifice for your dream, you don't expect the one person you trust most to be the one to tear it all down. But that's exactly what happened to me. There I was, in the middle of what should have been a quiet family dinner, surrounded by people who were supposed to love and support me. I had just hit a new milestone in my business, secured a big deal that would set us up for years. And yet, that night, everything came crashing down. At the dinner table, in front of his family, the ones I tried so hard to impress, my husband Adam, the man I thought I knew, dropped a bombshell that would change my life forever. He told me, without warning, that he wasn't happy. Not because of any petty issues, no, it was because of my success. He said he couldn't handle the pressure of my ambition, the spotlight I was in, the fact that I was always one step ahead of him. He told me it wasn't the life he'd signed up for, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part? Adam admitted to seeing someone else, a woman from his world, the world of wealth, privilege, and easy success. Someone who could fit in better with him. And just like that, the man I thought would always be my partner, the person who swore to stand by me no matter what, chose her. That's how it all ended for us. Right there, in front of his family, he ripped apart everything we'd built. It was as if all those years of love, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the tears, none of it mattered. And now I'm left with a choice. To let him destroy everything, or to rise from the ashes and build something even greater. So here's my question to you. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you let the betrayal define you, or would you let it fuel your fire? Stay tuned, because this is where the real story begins. I still remember the first time I met Adam Miller. I was 23, fresh out of college, and full of ambition. He was tall, confident, with that charming smile and a way about him that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. He came from money. His family lived in a massive house in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind you only see in movies. I, on the other hand, grew up in a modest home in Chicago, where my parents worked overtime just to pay the bills. But Adam never looked at me like I was any different. He saw me, not my background, not my bank account. He saw the fire in my eyes, the hunger to build something bigger than myself. We hit it off immediately. Our conversations never ran dry. We talked about everything from the latest tech trends to our childhood dreams. He was my rock, supporting me when I was starting my small social media consulting business. I didn't have much, just a laptop, a few clients, and a ton of ambition. But Adam was always there, cheering me on. "You're going to be something big, Emily. I know it," he'd say. And I'd believe him. But here's where things started to shift. Adam's world was easy. He had connections. He was the kind of guy who was born with doors opening in front of him. His family's wealth gave him an edge in every step of his life, and for a while, I admired that. He had everything I didn't: status, security, privilege. It felt good to be with someone who had so much, someone who made me feel like I could take on the world. But the longer we were together, the more I started to feel that our differences were more than just background. They were starting to affect everything. Adam was at a prestigious law firm, working long hours, making great money. But as my business grew, my schedule became even more demanding. I had to juggle late nights and weekend work, traveling to meet clients, and making sacrifices. Slowly, I found myself drifting further from Adam, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't have a choice. I watched Adam grow restless. He loved me, no doubt, but my success was something he couldn't handle. The more I achieved, the more distant he became. I thought maybe it was just a phase, maybe it was stress from work, but I felt the change in him, the subtle shifts in how he looked at me. At first, it was just small comments like, "Are you sure you have to work this weekend? We never have time for each other anymore." But soon, they became bigger questions. "Do you really need to be traveling again? Why can't you just take it easy for once?" And honestly, I didn't know how to answer him. I was trying to build my dream, something I could call my own. But in doing so, I started to lose sight of what I thought mattered: us. We weren't the same people anymore, and the gap between us grew wider. My success became a shadow hovering over our relationship, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Adam was resenting me for it. One night, everything came to a head. We were having dinner at his family's house, another fancy dinner with his parents, and I could feel the tension building in the air. Adam's mom, Barbara, always had a way of making me feel small. She'd drop passive-aggressive comments, asking if I was still working on that little business of mine, or whether I'd ever consider going back to school. Her words were always wrapped in a veneer of politeness, but there was no mistaking the judgment behind them. I didn't mind her subtle digs. I was used to them by now. But what hurt the most was that Adam never stood up for me. Instead of defending me, he'd stay quiet, or worse, join in on the criticism. That night, as I sat there, I realized something. Adam didn't see me anymore. He didn't see the girl who was working tirelessly to make a name for herself. He didn't see the sacrifices I'd made. He just saw someone who had become too successful, too ambitious, and too much of a threat to his own ego. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about him feeling left behind, and I didn't know how to fix it. The night ended with a brief but intense argument. I tried to talk to Adam to ask what was really going on, but all he said was, "I don't know how much longer I can keep up with this. You've changed, Emily. I feel like I don't even know who you are anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was I really changing? Was my success making me a stranger to the person I loved most? Or was it just that Adam couldn't handle seeing me thrive while he stayed in the shadow of his family's expectations? That was the turning point, the moment when I realized we couldn't keep going on like this. But the real question was, could we fix it? Could we find a way back to each other? At the time, I wasn't sure. And looking back, I wonder if I should have seen the writing on the wall. Sometimes what we think is love isn't enough to keep two people together when their paths are diverging in ways they can't control. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer let my dreams, my future, and my happiness be dictated by someone else's insecurities. And little did I know, that choice would be the first step in my own journey, one that would force me to face the hardest betrayal of my life. So, the real question now is, how much of ourselves are we willing to sacrifice for the people we love? And when does it become too much? The first cracks in our relationship were subtle. At least, at first, they seemed harmless. Little comments here and there that I brushed off. But in hindsight, those moments were more than just passing remarks. They were warning signs, flashes of the tension that was quietly building between Adam and me. The more successful my business became, the more distant Adam seemed. He never said it outright, but there was a shift in his tone, his body language. His unease was palpable. I began to feel it most when we were together in private. We'd sit down for dinner, and while I was eager to share the latest updates about my company, the new clients I had landed, or the breakthrough I had made, Adam would nod along, but his eyes were distant. He wasn't really listening, not like he used to. I could feel the quiet resentment in his silence, like my achievements were weighing him down instead of lifting us both up. I tried to talk about it with him, of course. I asked if everything was okay, if something had changed between us, but Adam would always say, "I'm fine, Em. Just a little stressed at work. You know how it is." And I believed him. I told myself it was just the pressure of his corporate job, the long hours, the expectations from his family. But deep down, something didn't feel right. It was like there was a wall between us that kept getting higher and higher every day. The real turning point came when we went to one of his family's infamous holiday dinners. His family was always over the top. Everything had to be perfect, every detail meticulously planned. I'd been to countless family gatherings before, but this time I could feel the tension in the air from the moment we walked in. Adam's mom, Barbara, who had always been a little cold toward me, didn't even bother to greet me with a smile. Instead, she immediately started with her usual passive-aggressive comments. "Emily, I see your company is doing well," she said, her voice syrupy sweet but with an underlying edge. "I hope you're not working yourself too hard. You don't want to end up like those women who put everything into their careers and forget what really matters." I could feel my pulse quicken. I had learned to handle her remarks over the years, but this one stung. It wasn't just about me. It was about the life I had built. It was about what I had sacrificed to get here. And there, in front of everyone, Barbara made it clear that she didn't think any of it mattered. To her, my success wasn't impressive. It was something to be pitied. I looked over at Adam, waiting for him to step in, to say something to defend me. But instead, he just stood there, silent. His eyes were fixed on his plate, avoiding the confrontation. That's when I realized it wasn't just Barbara, it was also him. His discomfort with my success, his inability to stand up for me, was more than just a momentary lapse. It was part of something deeper. As the night wore on, Adam's coldness toward me grew. I tried to reach out, tried to get him to talk, but he was distant, almost like a stranger. At one point, I asked him if something was wrong. His answer, though soft and lacking the usual warmth, was loaded with tension. "It's nothing, Em. Just don't want to make a scene." But the words felt empty. In that moment, I realized that he wasn't just ignoring me. He was avoiding me. He was avoiding what I had become, what my success was forcing him to face. And that realization hit me harder than I expected. It was the quiet moments, the silence between us, that felt like the biggest betrayal. I started to question everything. Was my success really something he couldn't handle? Was he becoming resentful of the life I was building? Or worse, was he jealous? As the days passed, I found myself wondering if we were still the same people who had fallen in love in college, the dreamers who had made promises to each other. Could we still be partners when we were clearly heading in different directions? The tension only continued to build. Every time I achieved something new, every milestone I hit, Adam became more distant. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, almost imperceptible. But the cracks in our relationship were there, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. It wasn't just the work, the long hours, or the expectations. It was the feeling that I had outgrown him. And as much as I loved him, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that this relationship wasn't the partnership we once thought it was. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about who we were becoming, separately and together. And the most terrifying part? I didn't know if we could ever go back to what we were. The doubt that had started as a whisper was now a loud, undeniable roar in my head. What was left of us? And could we find our way back? Or had we already drifted too far apart? This wasn't just a relationship falling apart. It was a life, my life, that was beginning to unravel thread by thread, and I had no idea how to fix it. It all came crashing down one night. The tension, the doubts, the long-simmering discomfort, it finally erupted in a way I could never have imagined. We were at another one of his family's elaborate dinners, the kind that always felt more like a performance than a gathering. His parents, the Parkers, with their grand house in Greenwich, their air of perfection and their expectations of me, it all felt like a show, and I was tired of pretending that everything was fine. I had just landed a major contract for my business, one that would change everything. My company was thriving. This was the moment I had worked so hard for. But as I sat across the table from Adam, I could feel that familiar coldness between us, like we were two strangers sharing a meal, not a couple who had promised to build a life together. The night started off like any other. We made small talk, smiled through the obligatory pleasantries, and I kept my focus on the food in front of me, trying to keep my nerves in check. But Adam, he was different. He seemed restless, fidgeting with his glass of wine, eyes darting around the room like he was trying to escape. I knew something was off. Then, in the middle of the dinner, Adam's mother, Barbara, dropped her usual passive-aggressive comments. It was her way of undermining me, of reminding me that I wasn't good enough for her son. But instead of the usual snarky remarks about my career choices, she made it personal. "Emily," she said with that fake sweetness I had come to know so well, "it's impressive that your little business is doing so well, but I do wonder how long you can keep it up. I mean, a woman like you, with your background, it's not exactly the kind of success that lasts." My stomach churned. How could she say that? And Adam, he was just sitting there, not a word of defense, not a flicker of support. His silence hit me harder than anything Barbara could have said. It was as if he agreed with her. I tried to keep my composure, but I could feel the walls closing in. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about us, our relationship, our future. And in that moment, I realized that maybe we weren't meant to be. But then came the bombshell, the words that would change everything. Adam looked at me across the table, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was something in his gaze that I couldn't quite place, a mixture of guilt and something else, something that I couldn't put into words. And then, without any warning, he said it. "Emily," he began, his voice flat, "I can't do this anymore. I've been thinking a lot, and the truth is, your success, all of this, it's too much. It's not just the pressure of your business. It's who you're becoming. You've changed, and I don't know how to keep up with you anymore." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this really happening? And then, as if that wasn't enough, he dropped the real bomb. "There's someone else. Her name's Sophia. She's from a wealthy family, just like mine. We're seeing each other. I think she's the future I want." The room spun. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Sophia? I didn't know who she was, but that didn't matter anymore. Adam, my husband, the man who had been my rock, had already moved on. I tried to hold it together, but the tears were already welling up in my eyes. It wasn't just about Sophia. It was about everything. It was about the betrayal that I never saw coming, the years of love and support that had meant nothing to him. And here I was, sitting at the dinner table in front of his family, trying not to crumble under the weight of it all. The family, the ones who had always looked at me like I didn't belong, were now silent witnesses to my heartbreak. Adam's mom looked at me with something like satisfaction, like she had won. And Adam, he just sat there, barely meeting my gaze. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. This wasn't just about his affair. It was about everything. It was about how he had never supported me when it mattered. It was about how he had allowed his family's opinion to dictate our relationship. It was about the fact that, after everything we had been through, he couldn't even fight for me. I stood up from the table, my hands shaking. "You want a divorce, don't you?" I asked, my voice shaking but steady. Adam nodded, barely looking at me. "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet. "I think it's the best thing for both of us." And just like that, it was over. I turned and walked out of that dinner, out of that house, out of the life I had built with him. As I stepped outside, I could feel the tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. The man I had loved, the man who was supposed to be my partner,
had chosen someone else. But more than that, he had chosen his own insecurities over me, over us. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need him. I was stronger than I had ever known. And I would never let this betrayal define me. I was going to rebuild my life, this time for me. And I would be unstoppable. The door slammed behind me, and I walked away, knowing that the hardest chapter of my life was finally behind me.
The next few days were a blur. I couldn't tell you what I ate, what I wore, or even what day it was. All I could think about was the words Adam had spoken to me, the way he'd casually tossed aside everything we'd built together. I thought I'd never be able to breathe again under the weight of it all. But then, in the quiet of my empty apartment, with no one to distract me, something shifted. I was angry, but more than that, I was ready to finally take control of my life in a way I hadn't been able to before. I had been fighting so hard to keep this relationship together, to win his approval, to prove to his family that I was worthy. But I wasn't fighting for me. I was fighting for a version of us that didn't exist anymore. And now it was time to fight for me. I took a long look at myself in the mirror that morning, and for the first time, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I wasn't the woman who begged for validation. I wasn't the woman who thought her worth depended on someone else's opinion. No, I was stronger than that. I had built a business from nothing. I hustled, sacrificed, and grown. And I wasn't about to let one man's betrayal define who I was. I needed a plan. I needed a strategy, something that could take my mind off the pain, something that would force me to channel my energy into something productive. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew one thing: I could do it. The woman I used to be, the one who didn't believe in herself, wasn't me anymore. I had earned every inch of the success I had, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. I decided to refocus on my business. My startup, which had been growing steadily, now had a chance to explode. I had the skills, the drive, and the network to push forward, and that was exactly what I did. I spent the next few weeks locked away in my office. My apartment had become my headquarters. It wasn't glamorous, there were no shiny offices or glass walls, but it was mine. The walls were covered with sticky notes, scribbled ideas, and plans for how I was going to take this business from good to great. Every morning, I set new goals. Every evening, I took a moment to reflect on what I'd accomplished. I had a hunger in me now, one that came from a place deeper than just business. This was personal. This was about reclaiming myself. I started reaching out to new clients, big clients, people who would help propel my company into new territories. I rebranded, revamping that marketing strategy to reach a broader audience. And as the days went by, the momentum built. The energy I put into my work became my escape, and in that, I found power. There were setbacks, of course. No journey is without its bumps. A few deals fell through, and I lost a few clients. There were days when I was tempted to quit, to throw my hands up and just walk away from it all. But then I would think about that dinner, about Adam's betrayal, and I'd remember what I was capable of. I wasn't going to let this defeat me. Then came the breakthrough. One of my campaigns, a story-driven social media campaign I had put my heart and soul into, went viral. Viral. That's the word that still rings in my ears. The campaign hit a nerve, and the buzz around it was unbelievable. Suddenly, I had brands, investors, and influencers knocking on my door. They wanted to work with me. They wanted to be a part of what I had created. It was in that moment, standing in the office of a major investor, listening to them talk about the future of my business, that I realized just how far I had come. I was no longer the woman who feared rejection. I wasn't the woman who was scared of what people thought.
I was Emily Thompson, a woman who had taken the worst moment of her life and turned it into something powerful, something that couldn't be ignored. The phone calls started pouring in. Emails, meetings, opportunities. The business exploded. And the best part? I was doing it on my own terms. There was no one behind me pushing me to change or fit into their mold. This was my journey, and I was the one steering the ship. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about me, about rediscovering the woman I had lost. I had become someone new, someone stronger. I had faced the worst betrayal, the most public heartbreak, and yet I had risen. And with every new milestone, every new opportunity, I could feel my confidence growing. And as I looked out at the skyline from my new office, I couldn't help but smile. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of my broken marriage. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. It was about proving something to myself. I was unstoppable. It had been months since I walked away from Adam and his family. Those months were some of the most transformative of my life. I had poured every ounce of energy into building my business, finding my footing again, and reclaiming the life I had almost lost. The anger and hurt I felt at first had slowly turned into something more empowering. I was no longer the woman who was defined by her past, by Adam's betrayal, or by anyone else's expectations. And yet, despite all my achievements, there was a part of me that still felt the weight of what I had left behind. Adam, the man I had loved, the man I thought I would build a future with, was still a lingering shadow in my life. Our marriage had ended, yes, but there were still pieces of me that hadn't quite let go. And I had to confront that reality, especially when he reached out. It was a simple text at first. "Emily, can we talk?" I stared at my phone, unsure of what to feel. Part of me wanted to delete it, to erase him from my life for good, and yet another part of me wanted closure, wanted to hear him out, if only to get some peace. So I responded, agreeing to meet. The day we met, I was a mix of emotions, nervous, anxious, even a little angry. The last time I saw Adam, he had ripped my world apart. But now, months later, I was a different person. I was stronger, I had redefined myself, built something incredible, and walked away from a life I had once thought was everything. When he walked into the coffee shop, looking as polished as ever, I felt a wave of familiarity wash over me. But this time, it didn't feel comforting. It felt like I was looking at a stranger, someone I used to know, but not anymore. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes the way it used to. There was something in his face. Regret, maybe, but also something else, uncertainty. "Emily," he said softly, sitting down across from me, "I owe you an apology. I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes, but I need you to know that I never intended to hurt you like that. I was lost. I didn't know how to handle everything that was happening. I didn't know how to handle you." I could feel the weight of his words, and yet I was far from convinced. This wasn't about the apology or the remorse he was showing. It was about the fact that I had already healed. I had moved on. The woman sitting in front of him now wasn't the same woman who had been devastated by his betrayal months ago. She had grown, she had learned, she had built a life that no longer depended on him, and I wasn't about to let him drag me back into the past. "Adam," I said, my voice steady, "I appreciate your apology, I really do. But the truth is, I'm not that woman anymore. The woman you left behind is gone, and the woman I've become is stronger than I ever thought I could be." He looked at me, a hint of surprise flashing across his face. Maybe he thought I would crumble in front of him. Maybe he thought I would fall for his apology. But I had built something bigger than that. I had built myself. "It's not about us anymore, Adam. It's about what I've learned. I spent so long trying to make things work, trying to build a future with you, but I forgot something important. I forgot about me. And now I'm focusing on what makes me happy. I'm focusing on my dreams, my business, my growth. I'm doing it for me, not for anyone else." His eyes softened, but I could see the disappointment in them. He was hurt that I had moved on, that I had found my strength without him. But that was something I couldn't take back. I had found peace in myself. I wasn't waiting for his approval or his validation. I had already become the person I always wanted to be. "You've done amazing things, Emily," he said quietly. "I can see that now. I should have been there for you. I should have been your partner. But you're right. You've built something incredible without me, and maybe that's what needed to happen for you to find yourself." I nodded, my heart surprisingly light. There was no anger, no resentment. There was only closure. "Thank you, Adam," I said, standing up to leave. "But I'm going to be okay. I'm already okay." And as I walked out of that coffee shop, I didn't feel like I was leaving behind the life I had built with him. I felt like I was walking into a future that was all mine. The woman who had walked into that coffee shop had nothing left to prove. The old Emily, the one who had begged for Adam's validation, was gone. Now I was free. But Adam's visit wasn't the only thing that changed. My business had boomed in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had more clients than I could keep up with. My social media campaign, which I'd launched just weeks before, had gone viral. It wasn't just success. It was proof that I had made the right decision. I had taken the hardest step of my life, walked away from the person who had once been my everything, and found that the life I had feared losing was actually the one I was meant to build on my own. As I sat in my new office, looking out over the city skyline, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And Adam? Well, he had his own journey to figure out. But for the first time, I knew that my journey was mine. And it was just beginning. I hadn't heard from Adam in weeks. After our meeting in the coffee shop, I thought that was the last of it. I had closed that chapter of my life, left him behind, and moved forward, focusing entirely on my business, on myself. Life was moving quickly. My company was growing, I was meeting new people, building relationships, and feeling more confident in my own skin than I ever had before. I was on top of the world, in control of everything that mattered. But then, out of nowhere, the text came. "Emily, I need to talk. Please, can we meet?" I stared at my phone for what seemed like an eternity. I was still angry, no, furious. But I had to admit, part of me was curious. Part of me still wanted answers, still wanted to know why everything had gone so horribly wrong. Why had he done this to us? And more importantly, why had he reached out again? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. But this time, I wasn't going in blind. I was no longer the woman who was lost, the one who needed answers to feel whole again. I was no longer the woman who was begging for an apology. I had already healed. Whatever Adam had to say, whatever his intentions were, I was ready. This time, it was on my terms. We met at a quiet restaurant, one that I used to love, a place that held memories of simpler times. The moment I walked in, I saw him sitting at a corner booth, his back straight, looking more like the man I had first fallen in love with than the man who had torn my life apart. But the reality was clear. He was still the same man who had broken me, and nothing could change that. "Emily," he said softly, as if he was trying to find the right words, "I'm sorry. I don't know where to start, but I need you to know that I regret everything. I know I hurt you, and I was wrong." His voice trembled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I've had a lot of time to think," Adam continued, his eyes searching mine for some sign that I still cared. "I've realized I made the biggest mistake of my life. You're everything I ever wanted in a partner, and I was too blind to see it. I was so focused on what I thought I needed that I lost sight of what really mattered. Us." I took a deep breath, leaning back in my chair. The old Emily, the one who had tried so hard to keep the peace, to hold on to the relationship, even when it wasn't working, would have melted at his words. She would have believed him, but I wasn't her anymore. "You're right," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You made a mistake. You chose someone else, you betrayed me in the worst way possible, and you left me with nothing but a pile of broken promises. Adam winced, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. And as much as I wanted to see him suffer, I realized something. I didn't need his apology to feel better. I didn't need him to validate my pain anymore. I had already healed. His regret didn't change the fact that I had moved on. "I'm sorry, Emily," he repeated, his voice cracking now. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope we can find a way to rebuild what we had. I still love you." The words hung in the air between us, but they didn't move me. I sat there, looking at him, really looking at him, and I realized that I wasn't the same person anymore. I had spent so long holding on to the idea of who we were, of who I thought we could be, but that version of us didn't exist anymore. "Adam," I said, leaning forward, my eyes locked onto his, "I don't need your love. I don't need your apology. I don't need you." He looked stunned, as if he didn't understand. I could see the shock on his face, but this time I didn't feel any of the old pain. It wasn't anger or bitterness either. It was clarity. "I've spent years thinking I needed you. I thought I couldn't succeed without your support. But the truth is, I was never the problem. You were. You were the one who couldn't handle my success, who couldn't handle who I was becoming. And that's not something I'm going to apologize for." I took a deep breath, letting my words sink in. I've built something, for me, not for you, not for anyone else, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what I've become, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else take that away from me. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity. Adam sat there, speechless, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. And in that silence, I finally felt free. I stood up, looked him in the eyes one last time, and said, "This is where we say goodbye, Adam, for good." I walked away from that table, my heart steady, my mind clear, and my future wide open. As I stepped out into the night, the weight of the past finally lifted. I was no longer the woman who needed his approval. I was the woman who had built herself from the ground up, and nothing could break me now. And just like that, I closed the door on the past and walked into a future that was entirely mine. I never thought I'd say this, but walking away from Adam turned out to be the best decision I've ever made. It wasn't easy, and I'm not going to pretend it was. There were days when the loneliness felt like a heavy weight on my chest. But as I settled into my new life, something incredible began to happen. I realized that I didn't need anyone to complete me. I had already completed myself. The first few weeks after our final confrontation were hard, but I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. I had a business to run, dreams to chase, and a future to build. But this time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't doing it for Adam or for his family or even for society's approval. I was doing it for me. I spent those first weeks in the small apartment I had kept in the city, living on my own terms for the first time in years. The space felt like a reflection of where I was in my life. Empty, but in the best way. It was clean, open, untouched by the past. It wasn't just a new apartment. It was a new chapter of my life. Every morning, I woke up and threw myself into my work. I didn't have time to sit around and mope. My startup, which had once been my side project, was now my focus. I rebranded, revamped my website, and reached out to new clients. There was a fire inside me that I hadn't known existed before. I was unstoppable. One afternoon, a major investor reached out to me, a company that had seen my work online and wanted to partner up. At first, I thought it was a joke, some kind of scam. But it wasn't. It was real. I remember staring at my phone, the offer sitting there in black and white, and feeling the rush of excitement pulse through me. This was it. This was what I had worked for, and now it was finally paying off. I signed the deal with a smile on my face, the same smile that I hadn't seen in months, the smile that Adam had once said was too forced, too businesslike. But I didn't care anymore. This was my success, not his, not anyone else's. But the biggest change wasn't just in my career, it was in how I saw myself. I used to think that without Adam, I would crumble, that my life would lose its meaning. But now I realized I had found meaning on my own. I had built something from scratch. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was good enough. I already knew I was. The more success I found, the more confident I became. I started getting invited to conferences, joining panels, and speaking about women in tech. People were listening to me. They were looking at me not as Adam's wife, but as Emily Thompson, the woman who had made it on her own. I was building my legacy.
And as my business grew, so did my sense of self-worth. I wasn't just succeeding in business, I was succeeding in life. I was taking control, no longer relying on others to define me. One night, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the lights of the city, I had a moment of reflection. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the heartbreak, and I realized something. Those things didn't define me. I defined me. I wasn't the woman who had been betrayed. I wasn't the woman who had been left behind. I was the woman who had taken everything life had thrown at her and turned it into something amazing. I was stronger than I ever knew I could be. That night, I took out my phone and texted my best friend. I made it. This is just the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. As my business continued to grow, I made a commitment to myself. I would never again let someone else dictate my worth. I would always prioritize myself, my happiness, and my dreams. The person I had become was unshakable, and I wasn't going to let anyone tear that down. In the months that followed, my company became a force to be reckoned with. I expanded into international markets, signed partnerships with global brands, and became a recognized voice in the tech world. But more importantly, I had become the person I always wanted to be, a woman who was empowered, independent, and free. I knew that the journey ahead would be full of challenges, but I was ready for them. This was my time. No longer would I wait for anyone to give me permission to succeed. No longer would I let anyone define me. I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, on my own terms. And as I walked into my office one morning, the view of the city stretching out before me, I smiled. Because this time, I was living for me. And I had never been prouder of who I had become. It's funny how life works. I used to think that success in business meant everything would fall into place. I thought once my company took off, once I had the financial security and the recognition I had dreamed of, all the pieces of my life would neatly fall together. But what I didn't realize at the time was that success in business doesn't always fix what's broken in your personal life. Sometimes those broken pieces need to be put back together on their own, and you can't just rely on work to fill the gaps. In the months following my rise from the ashes, things were going well. My business was thriving, I had more freedom than I ever thought I'd have, and I was starting to feel like I was truly living life on my own terms. But there was still a lingering shadow over it all. Adam, the man who had once been everything to me, was still out there, and the echo of our relationship, the love we shared, the betrayal, the way everything fell apart, was still in my mind. It wasn't that I missed him, not in the way you might think. It was more about the unfinished business, the feeling that I hadn't fully closed the door on our past. I had walked away, yes. I had rebuilt my life, and I was proud of what I'd done. But part of me felt like there was something missing, a sense of closure, of understanding. I had healed from the pain, but I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to completely move on until I could reconcile the past, even if that meant having one last conversation with Adam. I didn't expect it to be easy. I knew that confronting the past would bring up emotions I had worked so hard to bury, but I also knew that if I didn't face it head-on, I'd always carry that weight with me. And so, I agreed to meet him again. It wasn't about forgiving him. I had already done that for myself. It wasn't about getting back together either. This meeting, I realized, was about me reclaiming my power one last time. We met at a park, neutral ground, where everything felt more open.
Adam arrived first, standing there with his hands in his pockets, a far cry from the man I had once seen as my rock. He looked a little older, a little wearier. He wasn't the confident, charming man who had swept me off my feet all those years ago. And in that moment, I realized just how much I had changed. I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me anymore, not in the way I had once admired him. He was just a person, flawed and human like anyone else. "Adam," he said softly, almost hesitant, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this is difficult, and I'm sorry for everything. I wish I could go back and make things right, but I can't. All I can do is apologize and hope you can find a way to forgive me." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had heard these words before. I had listened to his apology, but this time it was different. This time I wasn't looking for redemption. I wasn't waiting for closure from him. I had already given myself that. "Adam, I'm not here to pick up the pieces of our past," I began, my voice steady. "I'm here to tell you that I've already healed. You can't fix this. What happened, happened. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm not holding on to the past. I'm proud of what I've built without you, and I know I'm better for it." There was a long pause, and I saw his shoulders slump slightly. It was clear the weight of the past was still heavy for him, but it wasn't my burden anymore. "I don't expect anything from you, Adam," I continued. "I've moved on. I've rebuilt my life, and I'm stronger than I was when I was with you. And that's because I chose myself over everything else. I had to let go of the idea of us to find out who I really am. And that's something no one, not even you, can take away from me." He nodded slowly, almost in disbelief, but the look on his face wasn't sadness. It was understanding. It was as if he finally saw the woman standing in front of him, the woman who had moved beyond the heartbreak, beyond the betrayal, the woman who had, against all odds, rebuilt herself. "I guess I've been holding on to the past too," he said quietly. I never thought I'd lose you, Emily, but I can see now you're not the same woman I knew. You're better." There it was, the truth, unspoken but undeniable. I wasn't the same woman. I had outgrown that version of me. I had learned to stand tall, to stand alone, and to trust myself more than anyone else. We sat there for a few more moments in silence, two people who had once shared a future, but who now realized that their paths had diverged. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. This wasn't about redemption or reconciliation. It was about growth, about finally seeing the relationship for what it was and letting it go. "I hope you find happiness, Adam," I said as I stood up to leave, the final words of our chapter. But I'm done with that chapter. It's time to write my own story now. As I walked away, I felt the weight of the past lift off my shoulders for good. Adam was still a part of my history, but he was no longer a part of my future. I had found my way, and nothing could take that away. And as I stepped into the future, I knew this was only the beginning. The story was mine to tell. It's funny how life has a way of coming full circle. The journey I started with so much uncertainty and pain now felt like a distant memory. Sure, the betrayal from Adam, the months of struggle, the sleepless nights, those moments would always be a part of my story. But they weren't the defining moments anymore. I was the one who defined my story now. Standing in my penthouse apartment in New York, overlooking the city, I finally felt like I had everything I ever wanted, but not in the way I had imagined. I didn't need anyone's approval, and I didn't need to chase someone else's version of success. I had created my own version of success, and it wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about my peace, my freedom, and the undeniable strength I had found in myself. My business was thriving, bigger than ever. I had expanded into international markets, gained loyal clients, and even built a solid team around me. But what mattered most was that I had become someone I was proud of, someone who had faced the worst kind of betrayal and come out stronger, someone who had finally learned that true strength isn't in what others see, it's in how you see yourself. But the real victory wasn't just in my business.
It was in how I had learned to love myself, trust myself, and never apologize for my success. The woman who had been afraid to take up space, afraid to be too ambitious, afraid to be too much, was now the woman who owned her worth and stood unapologetically in it. And as I sat there, reflecting on everything I had accomplished, I realized something. I didn't need Adam's apology to feel whole. I didn't need him to acknowledge my success or validate my decisions. I had already done that for myself. My healing had come not from his regret, but from my own strength, my own resilience, and my own ability to rise above it all. But this chapter was far from over. The future was full of endless possibilities, and I was ready to face it head on. And as much as I had grown, I knew there would always be more to learn, more to achieve, more to experience. Life had a funny way of surprising me. I had been knocked down more times than I could count, but each time I came back stronger, more determined, and more unstoppable. I looked at my phone, and for the first time in months, I saw a text from my best friend. She had been there through it all, the late-night phone calls, the tears, the frustrations, and now she was asking me to come celebrate my success. I smiled, knowing that this celebration wasn't just about my business, it was about me. It was about everything I had become and everything I would continue to be. As I got up to head out the door, I stopped for a moment, standing tall and looking out at the city below. I had built this life from the ground up, and no one could ever take that away from me. The woman I was now was stronger, smarter, and more confident than I ever thought possible. And the best part? I wasn't done yet. Before I wrapped up my day, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for taking this journey with me. It's been an incredible ride, and I'm so grateful for your support. If you've enjoyed this story, if you found something that resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration, and of course, subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. I've got plenty more to share, and I can't wait to take you all on the next chapter of this journey. Thank you for being here, and remember, your story is yours to tell, and no one can take that from you. Keep pushing, keep growing, and always believe in yourself. See you in the next video.